And one more quick video for you for this chapter, and it's a quick video on mutations and cancer. Now, our book doesn't go into cancer too much. You might think that's a little bit strange. I know I tend to flip-flop on whether or not I think that's strange because cancer is obviously a disease that affects the genetics of a cell. But the reason that we don't focus on it too much in genetics class is that it is not a hereditary disorder. Now, I'll explain what I mean by that in just a minute. You certainly can have cancer genes passed on in a family, but the reason that our book doesn't focus on it is because we're worried about heredity and passing on cells to the next generation. Now, in order for a mutation to be passed on to the next generation, it has to occur in the germline or the sperm or the egg cells. And so if it doesn't occur there, it's not going to happen. And many cancers occur due to environmental effects. And so those ones are not passed on. So for example, skin cancer is due to exposure to UV radiation. Lung cancer is due to, among other things, smoking. So some cancers arise because of environmental factors, and so they're not passed on. Now, that's not to say that there are not genes that could be passed on that increase your likelihood of having cancer. But cancer in of itself is not so much a genetic disorder in the sense of heredity. It's really a dysfunction in the molecular processes. So it really goes better in a molecular biology class rather than a genetics class. But it is worth talking about here because we are talking about mutations. So let's say we have a mutation in a somatic cell. So that's our non-sex cells, basically anything besides the sperm or the eggs. Now, if a mutation occurs in that cell, it's going to likely affect some process within that cell. If that mutation affects an essential function for the cell, that cell is just going to die. That mutation is not going to be passed on because that cell simply cannot function. But if it affects if it affects a non-essential function, that cell will continue to survive and continue to pass on the mutation. Now, what mutation that actually is and what it affects depends on many things. It depends on where it occurs and in what function it disrupts. But let's say that a mutation occurs that affects cell division. So cancer is basically uncontrolled cell growth. Now, there are a lot of pathways and processes that are involved in cell growth. So there are many genes that can be affected by mutations that are going to determine whether or not a cell enters this uncontrolled cell growth type phase. So there are generally two types of cancer genes, those that are tumor suppressors and those that are oncogenes. So some genes have the normal function of keeping cell division in check. So these are genes that are involved in cell division and whether or not that process is going to continue. Those are our tumor suppressor genes. So they allow the cell division process to go, but it keeps it from happening too much. So if you have a mutation in a tumor suppressor gene, that mutation is going to allow for unregulated cell growth and therefore a tumor. Then we have other genes known as proto-oncogenes, and these function normally to promote cell division. So they are in a normal cell regulating and allowing cell division to occur. So mutations that affect those proto-oncogenes are going to result in a new gene called an oncogene. And those oncogenes allow the cell to grow and divide without regulatory controls. So that cell may continue to divide and can eventually lead to the production of a tumor. So your tumor suppressors and oncogenes are almost like opposite genes that produce the same effect. Your tumor suppressor genes are supposed to keep the cell from dividing. They're basically blocking uncontrolled cell division, whereas proto-oncogenes are allowing cell division to occur in a controlled manner. But disrupting either of these can lead to uncontrolled cell growth. So we aren't going to go into the actual functions of proto-oncogenes or the specific functions of proto-oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes. They do a lot of different things. And a lot of different things that we sort of aren't ready for. I can tell you what they are, but until we get to later points in our semester, they won't really make too much sense. But they are basically all somehow related to controlling the cell cycle. So there's this diagram here shows some different types of cancer and their common genes that are disrupted, and then of course what they're actually doing. So transcription factor, that's one that we know already. Those regulate gene expression. And those are quite common in cancer. If they are uncontrolled regulation of one of these proto-oncogenes or tumor suppressor genes, they're going to sort of run out of control. So you don't have to know all of these. I just want you to understand that these cancer genes are generally related to some sort of cell division, cell gene expression, things like that, that are going to affect how controlled that process is. So there are two different types of mutations that can arise in a cancer cell. The first is the driver mutation. So the driver mutation is it's kind of the important one. It's the one that sets everything off. So it's the one that sort of flips the switch from normal cellular growth to unregulated cell growth. But when cells are undergoing unregulated cell growth, they often have a breakdown in processes that, like their cellular checkpoints, that are going to keep the DNA from accumulating other mutations. So remember, we have all those checkpoints and proofreading systems in place in a normally dividing cell. But when you start getting cells that are dividing out of control, they actually accumulate other mutations, these passenger mutations, as sort of a byproduct of that original mutation that is resulting in the uncontrolled cell growth. So passenger mutations are going to accumulate as the cell divides, and they are not necessarily related to the cancer gene itself. They are just sort of mutations that are picked up along the way. So they can be random and affect a wide range of genes. And as I said, many of them are not necessarily directly involved with the cancer. So this is part of the reason that cancer manifests itself in many different ways in many different people, because you get this accumulated effect of these passenger mutations, and so you're getting other cellular processes within these tumors and things that are affecting other mechanisms and patterns of expression.